needs to be refrigerated needs to be well preserved and refrigerated.
So what it is, it's basically like, if you think about a meat processing plant, right?
Yes.
There's a guy that goes and like scrapes up what falls on the floor.
Like eyes and penises and lips.
Yeah, we are streaming on Facebook. He mixes it on with grain, and then they boil it into a brick. So that's what we're talking about here. I mean, you need to keep it as cold as you need to keep a hot dog. It's yummy stuff.
It kind of
Kate looked like she vomited in her mouth just a little bit.
It makes me think of like the equivalents of the hot dogs at the Texas Inn.
It's probably the same quality of food. Actually, it's probably a step up from the Texas Inn. This EBCS broadcast brought to you by the Texas Inn, where you can get a cheesy Western anytime you want.
Hey, make your screenshot, make it gallery view so we can see everyone's faces.
Okay, there we go. That's better. You keep telling me to do that. I need to remember these things.
It's just nice to see everyone's face so that when Katie chuckles or something like that, it doesn't just like go to them when they laugh. It
is nice to see. I don't know if she's going to jump on because she was having more car issues this morning.
Got it.
Car
issues or car issues?
I think legitimate car issues.
It's been a process.
Well, next week I will bring you your liver.
Pudding. Liver pudding or liver mush. You can call it one of the two things. So Ted, do you know why we were having technical difficulty today?
I don't. Please
it's because I didn't think we would be going this long with this webcast. So like the webcast link actually expired. I need to set up a whole new one. But so I thought while I was going for my run today, by the way, Kate, did you see my time? I texted you with my time.
I did see it, and I was like, that's impressive because I just stayed in bed.
I curled up into a corner and kind of like regretted it right after. But I texted Ted and was like, what should we talk about today? And I want to talk about like some of the silver linings that are going to go along with this whole COVID madness and education. And then Ted wanted to talk a little bit more about student engagement and, really using the online learning platform in a way that students are going to grasp onto. So, Ted, I think Ted's setting up all his peeps. Is that what you're doing, Ted?
I'm looking for something that I wanted to look at while I'm talking, because the group contingencies thing, because like I have it really clearly described, and I don't like to think. I want to just.
It's one of your.
Thinking's hard.
So Kate, like we've been talking about different things that are, possible if we can find a silver lining in all this madness. And I was sharing with you about the conversation I had with the school division the other day. One of the things that we preach a lot when we go into classrooms is just environmental design and what a good classroom design looks like that supports language development, that supports independence, classrooms not being cluttered, having specific workspaces for specific activities, toys not being just accessible immediately for kids. And what's funny about it is, in talking to some of the SPED directors, that now they're saying to their staff, because of COVID, we need to have our classrooms look like this. So for us, that's kind of a silver lining, right? Like we have a
definitely. I mean, it's we can scapegoat COVID essentially.
I like that.
But I mean, yeah, being a former teacher, it's really nice to make your classroom super cute and engaging and everything like that. But it's really heartbreaking after, the first real tantrum and everything is just destroyed, and you have to stay late typically to pick up the things, and you have to reprint and put it back on the wall. And it's like, I mean, it's hard not to, because your classroom essentially becomes like a teacher's second home. And we just become emotionally invested in that space. And so when it gets broken in a way, we just take that personally. And I think this may help us like it's not about becoming attached to the room. It's about becoming attached to what's occurring in the room. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it does. And just good environmental design. Like we've been asked to do some trainings on setting up, what does setting up a classroom look like to facilitate social distancing and good practice. And one of the things that I pointed out to a SPED director was that, when you, especially our adaptive and functional classrooms, we violate's probably a strong word. We encroach upon children's spaces all the time without even thinking about it. We lean over a child. We get right next to a child, especially with our learners with kind of emotional disabilities or some kind of trauma history. That's just not good practice to begin with. But now with COVID, this all of a sudden is being thought about a little bit more. Okay, well, we do need to maintain the social distancing. One of the things that our pet peeve is walking into a classroom and seeing a learner sitting on an instructional assistant's knee or sitting on their lap, and that's not acceptable due to COVID now, which again, it's like scapegoating. I like that. We're going to scapegoat COVID.
Yeah.
It was never acceptable, right? And it's,
it
kind of
acceptable, but it was because, it's typically seen with the smaller kiddos, but what's forgotten is that those students get bigger and they get older and it's still not appropriate, but that it hasn't been faded.
Yeah.
And it just keeps happening. So.
Yeah. And I think, perspective wise too, it's, to me, it's never okay. I mean, you would never do that with a neurotypically developing child. And one of the things I always say to staff whenever I get pushback about it is, okay, you're sitting here with this 7-year-old on your lap, and what does that look like if I walk into a general education classroom and I ask a 7-year-old girl to sit on my lap while she does her math, right? That doesn't look right.
Yep.
So it shouldn't look right with a neurotypically developing child. And it's something that we see way too often. But because of COVID now, it's really being thought about and enforced because of the social distancing thing, which to me is a silver lining in all this.
I think something else is hand holding. So, we want students to form a line. And what we find is that, more often for that line to be successful, there's hand holding, but the hand holding's never faded. And so, we see these 5th graders still holding adults' hand. And then we see them in middle school holding hands, and it's that's not appropriate. You're wanting to be what's developmentally appropriate. It's not appropriate to be holding a hand in 6th, 7th, 8th grade with an adult. So,
Yeah. And yet it happens. I mean, it's not unusual to see.
But I think again, COVID may defer.
Yeah, we're just trying to wring every positive thing out we can of COVID.
Yeah.
And another maybe silverish lining is that with so much instruction moving to online, it is requiring rethinking the lesson plans and rethinking how the instruction is conducted. And there are ways to do it badly and ways to do it mediocrely and ways to do it well. But if we've been doing the same thing for a long time, every year, repeating the same thing, this gives you a chance to look at it differently. And sometimes you can make really big improvements that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, one of the things that's come up with the online learning model, because a lot of school divisions are still, even as they drift to online learning, they're sending these packets home, these work packets home. And one of the things I encourage SPED directors to think about is if you're kind of staying in that old mindset of busy work, just repetitively doing kind of the same activities over and over again on paper, it's not going to engage the students. And Ted's going to talk a little bit more about that here in a few minutes. But beyond that, you're really leaving around a packet of evidence for an advocate or due process attorney to say, look, you sent this home to everybody and it wasn't differentiated. It wasn't modified for my child's needs. So we really need to think about what we're doing as we do approach this online learning and make sure, it is the perfect opportunity, like Ted said, to rethink things a little bit. So,
well, another thing about that people need to be aware of is even though you may not be recording, you don't know what's happening on the other end.
That's right.
The parent is recording. And it's so easy to record whatever comes in on your computer. So, again, it's if you're planning it well and you're doing it reasonably well, there's nothing to be concerned about. But you mentioned sending the same packet home. Well, you're also sending the same thing into every living room or kitchen or dining room wherever the class is being taken, and people can record it and use that later, which, if it's for an instructional purpose, is pretty good.
Yeah.
But you're also creating the possibility that you're giving people evidence for litigation down the road.
Yeah, I mean,
I think too, with we're not saying don't give out handouts like worksheets, but don't look at the worksheet as that is the core instruction. Correct, Chad?
yeah, it's so funny. My father-in-law actually asked Kristen a question, my wife, yesterday, as whether she felt like she was an educator or she was somebody that facilitated education, facilitated learning. I'm not really too sure there's a difference, but if you step back and you look at the paperwork, if you're just giving out paperwork, right, you're kind of a facilitator and you're just having like busy work done over and over again. Whereas, with instructional design and delivery, there's a thought out kind of systematic approach to how you're going to introduce the material, how you're going to check for mastery and give that kind of practice to different individuals. And I think we've gotten complacent over the years in education. I mean, we really haven't changed the model of education since, early 1900s.
The
It's
invention of
still that.
I think the only thing that's really changed is the jargon. So
yeah, and the slate boards. We don't have slate boards anymore.
Yeah.
But slate boards have been replaced by iPads and
Well, they're
pencils
actually pretty cool though, and you can use those for active student responding.
Yeah. So
dry erase boards.
Can I bring something up really quick? So
always.
Thank you. There was something interesting. I was talking with someone and they were discussing how, especially because it's a secondary teacher, looking at the teacher as instead of a teacher or an educator, as a coach. And I thought this was interesting, and it might be like it just like popped into my head, and I was like, And when we were talking, I was like, why do they want you to look at yourself as, why do they want the students to perceive you as a coach versus a teacher? And they're like, well, there just seems to be like, they express that like, there's more respect for coaches and whatnot. And I was like, but is it that? Because in my opinion, I'm like, if a coach is doing an activity, facilitating an activity that is super motivating, right? And so the MO for getting to participate in this activity is provided by this coach. But if they mess up, if they start failing a class, what's implemented? It's not a reinforcer, it's a punishment procedure, which is to decrease the future frequency of that behavior. And so I was like, I think the problem is like if you change this whole mindset of this whole, if you becoming no longer a teacher but a coach, you have to still have the same authority and be able to implement some kind of punishment procedure that the coaches do. I don't know. It's something interesting, I think, with like, just with this whole thing of like, rethinking education. It's like they're rethinking titles. And I just thought it was kind of interesting. I wanted to get your idea on it.
So it's
go ahead.
Sorry, Dick. Let me get this out before because it's funny that you use that terminology. I think it was the VABA convention actually, Ted, a couple years ago, and there was a presenter on OBM, and I was trying to draw correlations to how OBM could be implemented in the schools, but he was referring to the concept of coaching, like a jobs coach, right? Implies that there is already experience doing that thing. So if you think about like a soccer coach, if I'm coaching a girls' high school soccer team, right, which I used to coach, the assumption is that you're trying out for the team because you already have a background in soccer and generally speaking, how to play soccer. It's not introducing new skills, it's building skills. And I think one of the things that is interesting about the educational model and how we use the term coaching, it implies that there is already a base understanding of that skill set that the individual is coaching. And I'm not sure that's always the case, especially when you look at the way educational coaches kind of manifest. It's usually like really good, really best teachers become instructional coaches, which doesn't always work out kind of in the social model of going into classroom and saying, okay, hey, you could be doing this or you could be doing that. It's not always received very well, because there's, at the end of the day, the thing that I think is most challenging about bringing kind of that organizational business management model into public schools is we wouldn't control the schedule of reinforcement, and we don't control the schedule of evaluation either. So I think one of the things that education's always struggled with is an accountability concept with teachers. And it's going to be interesting with this move to online learning, because now it's very individualized. The teachers are kind of having to create more on their own and allowed to get creative again, which if you think about how the SOLs kind of and Common Core took over, we moved into that kind of generation of teaching where we taught to the tests, right? Yep. And now I think that there's going to be the opportunity for teachers to kind of revisit some of that creativity there, a lot of teachers are really good at.
Well, yeah, a big difference between teaching and coaching, Chad, you hit on it. Coaching is when you're making it more likely the person gets something right when they already know how to do it. They've already done it. They already know how to do it, and they're in different circumstances, and so you're coaching them through it, getting them to do what they already know how to do. Teaching, you're getting someone to do something they haven't done before, or differently from how they did it before, or to not do something that they've done before. And there's a reason why we don't have coaches in medical school and we have teachers, and a reason why we don't have coaches in pilot school. There's a reason why we have math teachers and not math coaches, and reading teachers and not reading coaches. That's because this is stuff that, unless someone actually teaches it to you, you don't learn it, right? What teachers do, they do change behavior. Teaching is changing behavior. And what teaching is arranging the conditions for a person to do something they couldn't do before, or do it better than they did before, or do more of some things and less of other things, or whatever. But coaching is getting people to do what they can already do.
Yeah, so, and doing it as best they can, right?
Yeah, and we don't want teachers to be coaches. There's an element of coaching, there's the maintenance, and there's the, retention, and there's the, building on stuff that people already learned. But it's the job of teachers to get people to do stuff they couldn't do before.
Yeah.
That's teaching.
And it's funny, it resonates so much with me. And so much, it's funny, as my practice as a BCBA, I relate so much back to my experience coaching high school soccer. And the first years that I coached, it was a very rural high school soccer team, and it was the first year they had ever had a soccer team. And I went out there and I was ready to like do really complex overlaps and just really cool stuff. And I had one person that tried out that had ever played soccer before, and I shifted my mindset from coaching to teaching really, really quickly, because I realized I had to teach the game first before I could start coaching it. And it's so funny, Kate, that you brought that up, because I think it's something that gets overlooked a lot in the educational system.
No, it was just like, I remember hearing it, and I could understand where they were coming from. Like I could understand where the school division was possibly coming from, but I was also thinking, I was like, I don't think I still see it differently from you guys, where it's like what is the MO in a coaching area? It's getting to participate. It's getting the most time in. And if you backtalk a teacher and that teacher goes to the coach can implement something.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's interesting.
Just a thought. And I think I don't think that's going to be like a new, I think we might hear that more, where it's like, we're in this new virtual world. We're no longer teachers, we're coaches. And it's like,
no, you're teachers, and you have to
you're teachers
now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
frankly, it's doing a lot of what you already know how to do,
Yep.
but just doing it differently. You know,
Yep.
I taught face to face for years, and I'm doing it again this summer for the first time, or this fall for the first time in a long time. But I moved my program online 9 years ago, and it is actually doing all the same things, but you have to rethink how you do it
Mhm.
and accept that you're going to goof some things up and evaluate as you go along, you know, to keep what you did well, and the stuff that you kind of goofed up or completely missed the mark with, you got to accept that that's going to happen, and you're just going to revise it. You're going to do it differently next time.
Yep.
Yeah, it's funny because you do have a little bit more grace in online learning, I think, as an instructor, to reinvent yourself than you do face to face. You know, just the obvious for elementary school teachers and secondary teachers. I think college is a little different in that you don't necessarily have the classroom management issues that you do like with a third grade class or a fifth grade class. Although you could argue that a group of freshmen in college are pretty immature, but that group is probably sleeping in and skipping their 8 o'clock Monday, Wednesday, Friday class. But it is an opportunity to reinvent and constantly, okay, well, this wasn't working, so I can try this, or, you know, I mean, you can delete this recording and put another one up. So there is a lot of flexibility in it. What I've found troublesome, and it's very typical to kind of the way education system works, is they've said, okay, we're going to have you go to online instruction, either all week or just some compilation of the kids coming in a couple days, and then you're going to do online a couple days. So they rushed all the teachers through like a week-long webinar on how to deliver online instruction, and then just left it at that. Where that's really not the best way to get people ready for what they've got to do this year. So,
Well, no, because we know that, you know, we need to be providing modeling for effective instruction.
mm-hmm.
Providing modeling, and then we need to provide opportunities for the rehearsal or for that individual to practice after observing it, and then also to get feedback. And I think that's the one thing if there's a special education teacher out there, I have a feeling like if I was to be like, please comment if you feel this way. Special education teachers do not get feedback at the rate that general education teachers do. Am I correct? I don't know. But that, from my personal experience, like, you know, observations were constantly done in gen ed classrooms, but observations aren't done as often in special education classrooms. And then
it's the same mindset that's kind of floating around right now. We're gonna talk about the 98% and not talk about the 2% of, yep. You know, we're gonna figure that out. So yeah, Ted.
Kate brought up you have to model for people what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. But if you haven't taught online before, and you haven't taught well online before,
yep.
And if you're not facile with the learning management system that teacher is using, you can't model anything.
Yeah.
So, you know, so there's a limited pool of who can actually model this stuff. Far more limited than what there was before. And no one planned for this. You know, when I did my online instruction, when I started developing it, I developed the semester before what I was doing for the next semester. And I had someone who was an expert in developing online instruction working with me, and a crazy old doctoral degree in instructional design. But, you know, I had the advantage of someone who had done it well and done it many times, walking me through how to do it. But there's kind of a shortage of those people. And us well-meaning behavior analysts, we can say model what needs to be done all we want, but if there's not someone to model it, it's not going to happen.
So Ted, do you think I kind of felt like, you know, I feel like everyone's working a lot harder than a lot smarter, where, you know, instead of everyone creating their own plans, it's like, okay, let's look at regionally. And that's just my silly thinking. But I wonder if have some of these school divisions reached out to their local colleges who provide online courses, you know, and asked, you know, how is it that you guys do this? Or break it down.
Yes. I don't know if they did or didn't, and the online colleges were scrambling too, because just like the school systems, George Mason, while we have a lot of offerings online, we had to move everything online. So there were those of us who've been doing it for a long time who were tasked with helping faculty who'd never done it before, and that's the majority of them, move everything to online and to do it well.
Yeah.
And just because it's a college or university and they're doing stuff online doesn't mean they're doing it well.
Yeah.
You know, this isn't a matter of lecturing from your house, and it's not a matter, way back when I started working on getting mine online, what my then department chair, no longer the department chair, suggested I do is just run a camera while I'm lecturing in my courses and record what I'm doing and use that. And no, because, you know, you don't get anything from lecturing anyway. You need to keep your students active with the content while you're working through it with them, and frequently active with the content in a variety of ways. And you really can't, I mean, you can record that, but it's still not the same thing. You got to keep people active.
Yeah, we had talked about that.
I mean, it's,
with one of our webinars, we had talked about, you know, should we just set up a camera in the back and just record? I mean, no, that's awkward.
It's better than
nothing. It would be really weird.
You've done something, but it's really, you know, all the, you know, the research shows what makes a big difference is active student responding. You know, otherwise we might as well just post a bunch of TED Talks and have people watch them. Doesn't work that way.
So that's a great segue into that. I mean, so if we're thinking about active student responding, what are the best ways to create that? Okay, well, first, you gotta know how frequently you should be getting responses from the students. And I don't know, you know, I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I don't know that there's research that describes that. But I can tell you, whenever you're doing something new, whenever you're introducing something new, and you've gone over it, you kind of, you know, look at the behavioral skills training paradigm. It's name it, give the rationale for it, describe it, demonstrate it, get the student to do it. Well, if you're doing that, you know, name it. Okay, so this is what we're working on. What are we working on? Good. Give a rationale for it. This is why we need to learn it. Why do we need to learn it? Good. This is how you do it after every couple steps. So what are we doing? Good. This is how it's done. Watch me. Now, and then watch me and do it along with me. Now, that doesn't mean the students are going to do it along with you. I have been working with one kid whose brother was doing online PE this summer. And what he was doing was sitting back in his computer chair with his feet up on the desk, eating a snack while watching online PE. Just watching it.
Yeah, dude, shouldn't you be doing that? And he said, no. I said, okay, I'm not going to fight that battle. But then you have to watch the students actually doing it. So this isn't a matter if you're going through the behavioral skills training paradigm, which is a great thing to do. You don't wait until the end to get the active student responding, because that doesn't let you know that way back in the beginning, they didn't know what they were working on, even though you just told them. Mm-hmm. It didn't make sense to them, even though you just gave them a rationale. You got to be checking all along as you're going through it. So whenever you throw out a new little nugget there, you gotta make sure that people are understanding it. And after a while, you can go a couple nuggets at a time. But there are a lot of different ways that you can get that active student responding. There could be individual responding, and that could be either student clicks on the microphone and says something. Well, some students are more facile than others at that. Some parents are. And so, you know, that could be, and then there's different internet speeds and all of that stuff, you know. But there is individual. You can do that by just hitting a Y or an N in the chat box. Mm-hmm. You can do that by holding up a whiteboard. You mentioned slates. Hold up a whiteboard with an answer on it.
So I think it's important to point out that you're not, when you're talking about active student responding, you're not always talking about a response to the topic that you're working on, right? Like if you're working on math and you're delivering math instruction, you're also kind of checking in to make sure the students kind of still engaged with you, right? Not always, like every response is not what's 25 plus 50.
But it should be relevant to the content that you're working on, because there you're getting both a measure that they are attending, like looking at the screen and listening, and you're getting a measure that they're engaged in the content. Some people do, what drives me nuts is some people do what's called a pulse check. And then they'll actually call it a pulse check. And when I hear that, and these are smart people, these are people with doctoral degrees doing this, and I'm thinking, that's kind of, suggesting that you expect your students aren't paying attention. No, I expect mine are paying attention. If I'm doing a good job, mine are paying attention because the motivation's there. But no, I would do frequent checks relevant to the content that we're working on. Not just frequent, are you still there and awake?
So,
because there's more required than being there and awake.
So I think too, for the teachers out there listening, what Ted just described was a beautiful outline of a lesson plan. In all honesty.
Yeah, it's really that simple. Yeah.
He described, if anyone out there is familiar with a KUD, what's the knowledge that the student's going to know? What do we want them to understand? And what do we want them to do? And, then, there's other stuff like, what's the rationale? What's the big picture question? And I think what's cool is that, what Ted has kind of done is my brain's thinking of okay, this is the way I've had a lesson plan written before. Ooh, maybe I could, where we write all that beginning stuff and then we actually get to the implementation of the lesson. Maybe we are looking at we tell the students, okay, this is what we need to know. What do we need to know? That's your active student. And so it's like step 1, step 2. Yeah.
And frankly, if it's not something they need to know, don't waste their time with it.
Yeah.
Only go over what you need to know.
Yeah.
But again, it's the behavioral skills training paradigm is name it, give the rationale for it.
Yep.
Explain how to do it or task analyze it, demonstrate it, and then the student demonstrates it. Well, I like to throw in there with demonstrate it, then demonstrate it, and the student does it along with you.
Yep.
And then you observe the student doing it. But again, all along in there are opportunities for checking along the way to make sure that the student is not just attending, but getting what you're doing, so that you don't get down here and learn that the student wasn't paying attention and doesn't even know what you're working on, or you don't get down here and get a student who can do it but doesn't quite understand why it's relevant, or you don't get down here and the student can't demonstrate because they weren't following along when you were doing it. And frankly, sometimes the student can't demonstrate because you've done a really bad job of demonstrating yourself. And that's one of those things that, sometimes we're going to screw up.
But it's a good little feedback for you.
And then you fix it next time around.
Yep. And I think something that's really important to me that I found truly to be one of the most valuable things in pairing the activity or the task to the child is that rationale. Oftentimes we would hear why do you need to know this? That was something big in a school division I was working with. And some of the kids would respond, because it's SOL 1.3. And you're like, what? I found students really engaged and loved activities that had real life functional. So when we were learning money, I'd be like, why do we need to learn money? And they're like, and I'm like, what do you use to go buy the Takis at the gas station? And they're like, money. And I was like, you got to make sure you have
what, Kate?
Takis.
What is a Taki?
Taki, hello, pretzels with chocolate on it.
Oh no, Takis, Takkis. I think it's spicy hot Cheetos or something.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant.
Okay, and you're judging my liver pudding.
Hey, but I mean, so I worked with a group. So one summer school, I worked with a group of students that in summer school as 5th graders. I worked with them when they were going into 3rd grade. As 5th graders, we asked them, they would be asked, what's your favorite memory? And they were like, I loved getting to write about bugs to Mr. Seth. So during summer school, we were teaching about bugs. And I was like, we got to figure out how this is relevant. And so I was like, listen, I have this guy that's working on becoming a doctor about bugs. and he can answer all these questions for us. And they're like, so they're super pumped. They wrote letters to him, like asking, what kind of bug is this? I'm seeing it in my house.
And you could also teach them how to address an envelope and where a stamp goes.
And we
When my
did.
son-
Yeah.
When my son at 17 was applying to colleges,
Mm-hmm.
he didn't know how to address an envelope and where the stamp goes because that's not taught in school anymore. And here at home, we did most of our bill paying online.
Yep, and we
Um,
did that, and they loved it. But I think that's the really important thing. It's like why is it relevant to us? Like,
Yeah.
it's not just the SOL, it's not just for the test, it's for a purpose. And that's, a lot of us think, you know, we have to pair ourselves, we have to pair an edible. No, you can pair the activity to be something.
And it should be, right?
Yeah.
It should be something that has meaning.
And,
Ted,
and
I got a question for you.
Go ahead.
Okay, so we're talking about like student engagement and that kind of that planned activity check mindset. How do you maintain that student responding when it's not asynchronous? Because a lot of teachers, what they're getting ready to do is kind of set up, recorded access.
Okay, you mean so you're talking about when it is asynchronous. Asynchronous means
When it is
asynchronous.
okay,
means,
when it is, yeah, thank you. When it
time.
is.
Again, you can't. Let's not talk about that yet. Let's get to the other one first, because
Okay.
there's a lot more involved in the other one. Again, I've seen it done badly. So, frequent individual responses, which could either be spoken, individual, that again requires people are able to coordinate their microphone, or it could be typing a Y or an N, or typing something in the chat box, or it could be holding up the yes card or the no card, or holding up the whiteboard with something on it. Then there can be group responding. I love the group responding. And this could either be choral responding, so spoken, or it could be holding up the whiteboard with something on it. If it's like this sort of thing where you could see everyone at the same time, or it could be typing something into the chat box, a yes or no, Y or N. If the learning management system allows for polling, you can set up polls and have students select the response, even multiple choice things. Now this calls for planning ahead of time, but that's okay. But my thing there is you could also put people in groups and have a little bit of healthy competition. And if you're going to do the group contingencies, I would really recommend the interdependent contingency. And what the interdependent contingency is, each member of the group has to do something. No one member of the group does the whole thing. Each member of the group has to do something. And when they meet criterion or when the job is done, every member of the group gets the reinforcer. The way I've seen it done that makes it work well is the rules are everyone has to do at least one part, and everyone has to help at least one other person, and only nice words.
I love that because it's set the expectations and the criteria about working as a group, and it's not as much the task.
Yeah, well, and when you do that, things work out well. But why not also work some sort of token system into that? And what the token system is, you're not going to stick things with Velcro on anything because they're there at home, but you give checks, you give smiley faces, you could keep a tally on your own whiteboard by group or by student who's winning. And the big reinforcer is that person gets to pick the song you're going to listen to later, or that person or that group gets to pick something, or that group gets to, everyone else has to leave and that group gets to stay after a little bit for something. Rather than that group gets to leave early, we don't want to make escape from instruction a reinforcer.
That's a really good point.
Fun stuff to be the reinforcer. So there are a lot of things we can do there. And I want to share something. So I'm going to screen share.
Well, and so while Ted is sharing it, as a teacher, we would, maybe go around and give check marks like on a board or on their desk. You could very easily have a whiteboard next to you and just like have group 1, group 2, group 3, or their individual names and just give checks that way.
Yep. Yeah. And again, do things, remember that the learning channels exist, and do things across as many learning channels as are relevant while you're doing this. You got to do this when you're teaching in person too. And this is just, excuse me, this is just good instructional design. Because again, think about it. to do addition, it's not just saying 4 when someone holds up what's 2 plus 2, but it's knowing, it's being able to get to assemble 4 things when you need 4 of them. It's being able to, you know, answer what's 2 plus 2 no matter how it's presented in a bunch of ways. It's being able to put together combinations of things to get 4. There's a lot that goes into it. So we make a huge mistake and we deprive our students of a fuller education when we only teach in that one learning channel. And again, if this is what you're interested in, type in learning channels, precision teaching, and see what Dr. Google has to offer. And you'll find quite a lot there. So I'm done now.
Okay, well, no, you're done with the easy part. Now you got to talk about the hard part when it's
Okay.
When it's
So
asynchronous.
well, people have a hard time with asynchronous too, though, because you know you're not used to it, because you can kind of look around the room and see who appears to be paying attention. But if they're like me, they're good at faking paying attention, and they really have cartoon theme songs going in their heads. So,
yeah, Kate's got cartoon theme songs going through her head right now. I can see it.
What I do, what I myself do in my own courses, which are all asynchronous, is I have a little bit of recorded video, a couple of quiz questions, or an activity they have to complete. And if your learning management system lets you, you can set it up so that the next part unlocks only when they finish that one.
Mm-hmm.
Now mine does. I haven't figured out how to do that yet. So again, it's get frequent responses and go for straight out. And remember, you know, think in terms of Bloom's taxonomy. Go for straight out recall, but work your way up to application and building something with it and evaluating. Do some good direct instruction. Have people identify examples and non-examples so you're sure they have the concept, and then they have to develop something. Then they just have to write something little. That got me thinking about something else, and it's gone now.
Can I interrupt you? And maybe it'll help you remember.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here and I'm just thinking, you know, a lot of out there in the teaching world, it's like people are saying, you know, we have to learn something completely new.
Yes,
you know, like this is new, this is new, this is new.
Yes, it
but
is.
The delivery is new, it's different, but everything we have discussed thus far is already there. We've talked about balloons, we've talked about KUDs, BS, like this isn't new stuff. So it's just really the newness is in the delivery. Do you agree with that, Ted?
And the design, I think too. I think you've got to account for the fact that you're having to design instruction and mastery checks differently. But yeah, I think so. I mean, I think teaching this.
But I think for someone like, you know, I think of it like, you know, that blank, a blank PowerPoint, you know, when we've been assigned, you know, hey, would love for you to create this PD. And we're like looking at a blank PD, like a blank PowerPoint slide, Google slide. And we're like, how am I going to put create 50 slides for a 3-hour PD? Like, I don't know. But it's like, but the foundation is there. The foundation is there. And so if you remember, like the things that the good teaching practices that I do in person, I can still implement. I just need to change up the design and the delivery.
And then when you go back to teaching in person, you have this new experience and you could bring some of that back to your in-person teaching. You know, what I started doing after I started teaching online, and again, it's all asynchronous, everything's recorded. I make those recordings available to my face-to-face students too, because my online students get to watch them and review them as many times as they want to or need to, but my on-campus students were only getting it once when I did it in class. But I make those recordings available to them, and it had me rethink all of that. Okay, I remembered several times what it was. Oh, yeah. About the learning management system you're learning. I think it stinks that what school divisions did was gave everyone a 1-week crash course in it. Because I don't know about you, but when I have to do those, even if it's a 1-day crash course or a 2-hour crash course, I don't remember anything. I learned very, very little. I really don't learn a lot. But what I would recommend, there's a lot that you can do. Learn everything you can about your management system, but keep it very simple. And do well those few things you do. And think about what you'd like to do online and then look for how to do those things one at a time in the learning management system and add to it that way, because you're going to goof
It's
stuff up. And I'd rather have it simple and goofed up so I can fix it than 85 things and goofed up and I have to fix 47 of them.
Huh, that sounds like a fixed ratio schedule of reinforcement.
it's going to be interesting to see down the road some of the studies that come out of this transition. I mean, I have a hard time seeing like live instruction taking place with elementary school students. Because parents are going to have to facilitate a lot of the engagement, like getting on the computer, getting logged in. And if parents aren't available during the day, then I'm kind of cynical about how they're going to engage in that. But the other thing that I think is going to be interesting to see is thinking about some of our elementary school students, like kindergarten student teachers are a really good example of this. Kindergarten is a tough classroom to teach. But one of the reinforcers for the teachers is the interaction, the face-to-face interaction with the students themselves on a daily basis. And like, while you may have little Johnny that's just kind of running around the room and tearing things apart, there is that one moment of the day, right, where you have this very kind of connective moment with them, and you're like kind of forgive everything. It's going to be interesting to see what this does to the teaching profession kind of burnout wise, because you're not having that kind of face-to-face interaction with students anymore. And it might not be as reinforcing to some teachers. The other thing is just practicality. So we are working with one school division, their pre-K is going to be virtual and online. And I'm just like, in the back of my head, I'm having like a crazy time picturing what that looks like.
There's already so much edutainment that no one has to
to
pay attention to. And I think we can learn from that. And I'm not saying you have to dress up like the Wiggles and do a lot of singing and dancing. However,
I do like the Wiggles,
what does the edutainment have going for it? A lot of reinforcement value, a little bit of content, a lot of reinforcement, a little bit of content, a lot of reinforcement. Why can't we do that? And again, I think I mentioned last week or the week before, one of the things that a special ed teacher did over the summer, and I was able to observe her work, she was working with someone who I work with, was she would have, it would be in a half-hour session, she would have music videos. And the student, one of the students got to choose the music video. Now, it wasn't what video do you want? It was, do you want this one or this one? And she'd have them queued up and ready to go. And, what she was doing, she would call on students. She would present the content, call on a student, present more content, call on another student, present more content, call on another student. But it wasn't in rotating order. It was kind of in random order. So you had to be paying attention. And yes, that's absolutely right. And after a while, she'd call on someone and they got to choose the video. So there are things you can do to pull reinforcement into it. And it's going to be different, but you do have to pay attention to what functions as a reinforcer for your students. Because, you're not going to be putting on, CNN as a reinforcer. You got to pick, unfortunately, like Justin Bieber. I didn't even know he was still a thing. And one of the kids in this class really loved him some Bieber. So he'd always choose the Bieber video.
Kate was delivering instruction over the summer to a student who was boy band crazy. And I think she probably could sing every song.
Yeah, there was one song
by memory.
There was one song I remember, like I was like doing dishes and I started singing it. And I was like, wow, those lyrics are like really relevant to today's like time. It's like,
yeah,
hey, you've been listening to the song way too much.
Yeah, and I think the reinforcement component for the kids is interesting. I mean, it's especially if it's, again, I don't envy anybody that's got to do this. And I'm thinking of like a first grade class just sitting across my Zoom screen. No, Johnny, put that, no, come back to the computer. No.
Oh, if you're spending your time doing that, that means you don't have enough reinforcement built in. You haven't gotten the parent cooperation in preparing things, and you're wasting time that you could be doing other things.
And that's my point. I mean, like when you have all those kids in a classroom, you kind of have instructional control. You're controlling the environment. But all of a sudden you're opening up your Zoom or whatever platform you're using to like 20 different environments. If it is like a live instruction,
Yeah.
and that parent cooperation is so important.
Well,
Just kind of facilitating.
Think of all the things you're not having to do, and that frees up time, like all the lining up and walking down the hall and getting somewhere else and putting things away
Yeah.
and taking things out, and lunchtime. You don't have to be a lunch monitor anymore. Lunch is on their own. No being a recess monitor. You know, it is going to free up some time for some things. We have a question on Facebook Live. May I ask it?
Yeah, sure.
It's from Jelaine Ross, who's been with us this whole time, and it's from a little while ago. She said, which brings us back to full circle. I'm wondering why you think teachers will have more freedom to teach with less restrictions by SOLs.
Well, I think it's a good question. I mean, first of all, I have two theories about the coming year. One, the governor in Virginia, at least, hasn't said one way or the other whether or not they're going to hold schools accountable for SOLs. I actually kind of hope they do. And we look at the data that comes out of it. I mean, because there's kind of two camps right now in education. There is this camp that thinks there's going to be this massive loss of learning that occurs from like when we close schools back in March to when schools kind of come back in full session. And then there's camp that thinks that this online learning model is going to make instruction more accessible to a lot of students. So I would be curious to see, we run this online learning and we see what the SOLs show at the end of the year. I think that they will show either maintenance of scores, or they'll actually show an increase in scores, because I think that learning is going to be more accessible. But I think that with the online learning modules, at least what in the school divisions that we've kind of been involved with, the teachers have been given the platforms, and then they've been given a wide range of application for it. So they can really decide what their instruction is going to look like. Where when you think about kind of the scope and sequence that's regimed in the in-person instructional model in classrooms, I think that you're going to be able to move away from that a little bit because of the online learning. And I just think creativity wise too, I think that there's going to be some teachers that are really good at it, and some teachers that struggle with it, and some teachers that just refuse to do it. Yeah. But I do think that it's going to allow for more opportunity to teach.
Now, a couple of things about that though, regarding the SOLs. One, some of those objectives, some of those things students have to learn, at least that I've seen from, my brief time working for a local school division up here, it's going to be hard to do them at home. Like, student will point out water and land on a map and on a globe. Okay, it's easy to get a map. You can print one up. You can't print up a globe. Not everyone has globes anymore. This isn't the 50s and 60s when you had your encyclopedia and your globe. You're going places. But the other thing is, I'm concerned for those students who are in families that have only one computer or two computers.
Or no computers.
Students, or no computers, and multiple students who need to do their instruction online. And parents have to work from home online too. I don't know how they're going to get it done. At first, years ago, when schools started giving out tablets and computers to all their students, some of the wealthier school systems, I thought this is incredibly wasteful. There's going to be a lot of online shopping and online non-educational stuff going on. And maybe there is, or maybe there isn't. But at the same time, those kids are now able to participate in instruction. I'm wondering about the more rural parts of our state and the less wealthy.
So for the most part, I mean, all the school divisions that I'm in contact with, even some of the ones that are more economically challenged, they're at the point where they're providing one-to-one technology with all the students. So some of the urban school divisions that we work with are from K through 12, they're being provided devices.
But then they have to and there are still parts of Virginia that do not.
Yeah, and they're it's not an easy thing to address. I think a great side hustle would be setting up buses and driving them into neighborhoods with high-speed internet and just parking them and having the school system pay for it. Yeah. And I think, one of the cities that we worked for did that during back in the spring. They were actually parking school buses with high-speed internet connection. I think that a couple of things that schools just aren't being very forward thinking about is data limits that a lot of parents have, like, because especially for those rural places that don't have fiber optics and actual Wi-Fi, they're using data plans. There are data limits, and even if you have unlimited data, your data slows down after a certain point. So I think those are some of the kind of like the long-term things that we're not thinking about. I will say from what I have been exposed to kind of statewide, it does seem that devices are not going to be a problem, that is an accessible thing. Now, one thing that I do find interesting though is how each student interacts with a device, because it's really funny when you start working with a student, like third, fourth grade student, and you realize they have no idea how to type because their only interaction with technology has been their finger.
Yeah.
So because we've moved so far away in the schools, we have iPad carts more than we have laptop carts anymore, so it's that in and of itself is going to be a challenge. And then my favorite part of the laptops is, we were talking about escape earlier. It's really easy to escape instruction with a laptop because I just have to close it. It's a pretty quick thing to do.
Yeah, and it's easy to escape instruction on a tablet even. All you need to do is have multiple tabs open. And so you go back to playing your game on this tab while this tab is also open with the teaching going on, and there's all the sound and everything, but you're playing here. Yeah, I encountered that with a couple of my younger clients whose parents were making them go to therapy. Like, I hate this family. They're making them go to therapy. And it was while we were all locked down before I'm back in my office. And it was pretty clear to me, and I'd call them on it, that they were playing on their computer when they should have been participating with me. So.
Right. Did we answer the question? Did she have a response to that, or?
Elaine, did we answer your question? Maybe she'll respond to that.
I think a lot of people, we've talked about just kind of the stress that and anxiety a lot of teachers are kind of coming into the year with. There's a lot of change. My family lives and dies by education, whether it's myself or my wife. She's an elementary school teacher. And she teaches in one of those rural communities where kids don't have access to high-speed internet. So there's a lot of question marks. I mean, it's Kate, you messaged me yesterday talking about how, this year is going to be crazy, but it's going to be exciting too, because it's not very often in the world of education that we live through such a substantial shift.
I think for me personally, I'm just really trying to take it on in a different mindset, where it's like, it was really uncomfortable. We've been through it in the spring, and so going forward, we can make the choices, and Ted, I might be very wrong, but it's like, we can make the choices to see things negatively, or we can look at things positively, or just like, and I personally just want to look at it as like, what, it's going to be difficult, but how can I make this a positive thing in my life? Everything
always changes anyway.
Yeah.
This is one of those unexpected things that actually, not the COVID part itself, people are getting sick and dying.
Yes.
But what we're having to do in education, this could actually be something that turns out really, really good for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just, I keep trying to tell myself that.
I think it really, we may be able to see who the teachers are that, do the teacher talk in the teacher lounge, and then the ones who choose to stay out of the teacher lounge, just because, teaching world can be very toxic. And so it's like, you really have to make a decision if you're going to be a part of that toxicity, or if you're going to be part of the change. So.
Yep.
Yeah. So, all right, guys. Well,
on that note,
I think we hit on a lot of stuff today. Sorry about the links. I'll get the new ones set up and get those scheduled out. But I think we keep talking about, some of the changes that everybody's in for, and we're going to start to have some real life experience here shortly as schools start to come back and get involved. So
I think too, if anybody out there, if there's been a plan decided in your school division and you're just like, how does this look? We can definitely maintain animosity and just, you know, talk through it. If you send us a plan and you're like, I don't know what this looks like.
Okay, you make fun of my relevant and relevance, but I think anonymity is what you were looking for there.
Thank you.
Animosity.
Yeah, let's not maintain animosity. Let's get
Yeah.
rid of animosity.
Thanks, you guys. Yeah.
We're gonna maintain animosity here at EBCS.
No, thank
We don't
you.
want to do that.
Well,
That
maybe
I
I
hope
said that because I can't say anonymity.
And that's a tough word. It's like anonymity. Anonymity.
Anonymity.
Anonymity. I can't say it. Thank you for clarifying. I'll talk to you
All right,
later.
everybody.
Bye.
We'll talk to you soon. Thanks a lot, guys.
Bye. Love ya.